Hey there, listeners. This is Mac Christian with the National Land Realty Podcast. Now, before we jump in here, I have a request for you. And the request is simple. If you find value in the content that we're producing about land, please make sure to leave a review about the podcast and rate it. If you're enjoying the topics that we cover, your review is going to help other people find that same content. You know, unless it's a one-star review and you only have terrible things to say, but even then, maybe we'll get some entertainment value out of it. Thank you again for listening. Let's get to it. Welcome to episode number 13 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, we're trying out a new approach to the podcast. We're breaking down these episodes into a little bit more bite-sized listening times. Haven't made a huge push to shorten the episodes because I really want to make sure to cover the topics as comprehensively as possible, but that can create some long listening times. So, this episode will be broken down into two parts. What's this mean for you as the listener? If you like this episode, stay tuned. There's more. Now, today's episode will cover agricultural land from the perspective of buying or selling it, as well as the current market conditions for agricultural land. Our guest, Ryan Schroeter, is a land professional from Omaha, Nebraska, and he has decades of experience in land real estate and a lifetime of agricultural knowledge. Ryan has been hunting and fishing and farming since he could walk. He's an accredited land consultant through the REALTORS Land Institute, and his focus is on agricultural land sales. Now, sit back and enjoy the show. All right, I'm sitting here with Mr. Ryan Schroeter out of Omaha, Nebraska. So first question, Ryan, do you know Warren Buffett?
I don't know him personally, but I wish I did. I wish I was some long distance relation of his, to tell you the truth.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't really help you out. He's cut all of his kids out of his inheritance, right? So, I mean, he's making.
Yeah, but I still have a feeling. I think they're set up pretty good.
There's probably an edge there, especially being, you know, just the name, right?
Yeah.
So I had to ask that. That's just something I can't get by with you working in Omaha, especially working around land, since he has the Berkshire, you know, real estate. But anyways, Ryan, you've got a long background in land, and you've been a consistent high-level producer as a land agent or a land professional. Tell me how you got into this. What's your background?
You know, it just kind of morphed into real estate. Really, I started off, you know, as any farm kid does. You know, age 10, you're out there running the equipment. You know, planting, harvesting, you're running the irrigation equipment. Did that over the summers in between high school and college. I took some real estate courses, liked them. Before I even graduated college, at the age of 21, I had my real estate license, stayed back and started selling houses. And then I did that for 4 or 5 years. Figured I wanted to make a go at the land, because that's my background, was farming. So I just started my own little company at that time. I do believe that was around early 2000. I think 2002 is when I started my own little land company and focused on agricultural and transitional ground just outside Omaha. And it has really developed to what we have now.
Awesome. So you were one of those kids, right, that grew up in the ag family. I've always made the joke that farm families and ranch families, they don't have kids, they increase their workforce. What age were you when you started?
As soon as I could probably walk, I was doing something. So yeah, whether it was cleaning out hog pens, feeding the cattle, you know, simple things like that when you were younger. And then, you know, just like any farm kid, before you actually have your actual driver's license by 16, you know, you're operating multi-million-dollar equipment. And, you know, so it was one of those things. Before you start driving, you actually have your driver's license, you're out there in the fields working. And, you know, yeah, increasing the workforce, helping everybody out. That's the name of the game on the farm.
Yeah, my family had our business was a feed mill. I remember starting in at 7 years old. I'd go in there and sweep out the augers and be shoveling grain like off the dock and everything. I've always just kind of wondered about, kids that didn't experience that. It's like, what did they do with their childhood? Nobody even picked up a shovel.
Yeah, I know. There's times where I can remember, going in, especially my junior and senior year of high school. We'd have our 2-a-days of football. Well, in between the practices or after practices, I was out, I would either feed the hogs or clean the hog pens, walk the beans, because that was early August, late August. So there were still things to do. We had mow all the farm places. So those are things I was doing. And my buddies, they were like, oh yeah, I'm so tired. I'm just going to go lay down. No, not me. I had to go do something on the farm. But to be totally honest with you, I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Oh yeah. Oh well, and I talk about it. I wasn't even. Mine was more of a summer activity. I would get shipped off to work with my uncle and my grandpa, really, because I was a pain in the neck. So it was a way to give mom some relief, I think. So yeah, you work around Nebraska and talk to me. It seems, you specialized in agricultural land for most of your career. So is that still what you work with the most?
Yes. Yeah. For Nebraska, I'm licensed in Nebraska and Iowa. And yes, if I could do one thing every day, it'd be looking at, your tillable tracts, whether it's dry land or irrigated land. So that's what I would love to do day in and day out. Does it always happen that way? No. I also kind of go look at transitional ground close to Omaha that could be divided up. I've had my hand in some commercial projects. For some reason, I found a niche in the mobile home park industry. So it just kind of all facets, really. But yes, if I had my preference, yes, it would be tillable tracts.
And when we're talking about agricultural land, there's 3 types, right? Can you walk us through and just explain those a little bit?
Yeah, you kind of have 3 little types. You would have your irrigated ground and dry land, which you could classify all those as tillable. Then you have your pasture, your grassland. So maybe not 3 types. You really have 2 types, but tillable and pasture.
Perfect. And so one of the things I wanted to put out front here, because it has been an interesting thing, and I think that you can support more than I can, sort of because you have your boots on the ground more than I do. The big news right now is market correction. And we hear about that in the real estate market, specifically around residential real estate. We've had a lot of, it's been driven by during the COVID epidemic. A lot of people were buying houses in rural areas, getting out of the city. There was an element out of that. There's different statistical points to be made up of that. Some show people moving primarily to suburbs and not necessarily rural. But I think people in rural communities definitely noticed population increases. But we've started seeing some of that market correction where residential prices are starting to decrease. What can you tell me about the ag market, specifically farming, ranching? I guess that takes up the ag market, but what can you tell me about what you're seeing with values and how those are maintaining?
Well, and you bring up an interesting point. When people are looking at real estate in general, and I use air quotes when I say real estate, they tend to view the residential side of things because that's what a lot of people associate real estate with. But in the agricultural side of things, I'm not seeing a market correction. I'm not seeing price lowering. I really don't see a downturn. I constantly see newer, higher prices in each county that I'm working in.
Yeah, and that's sort of reflective of what we're seeing in the data sort of nationwide, as you've seen price per acre increasing, even though you're seeing houses drop. What we're seeing right now in the residential markets is anywhere up to 14%. And, that's not happening in ag. And, can you shed some light on sort of why why people might be looking at ag, even though, you're looking at sort of a recessionary period, or, and I realize we're on the front end of it. We can't really say whether we're in a true recessionary period or not. You don't really know until you're like in the middle of it. Right. So,
it's too early to tell.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, kind of to revisit your previous question, I think one of the reasons why the residential side of things is dipping is partly because interest rates have risen and they've increased the interest rates here. And that has maybe taken out a lot of buyers, where some of your buyers for agricultural ground, they're cash buyers. They don't really need to go to the bank. So the increase in interest rates, they're not affecting them. They still need to have the ground to increase their family farm size, increase their tillable amount, increase their pasture for their carrying capacity of their cattle. So there's still that want and need for the agricultural land.
Yeah, and that's very, I'd say on point. Is, even with previous episodes that we've done with lending, talking about that, where the land industry is very unique in terms of real estate, where it is hard to acquire loans for land, especially agricultural land. It's most of the loan system in the US is geared up for residents. And when we're talking about land, it's hard to get a loan. And what you see is a lot of it's cash, a cash business, and people use cash to purchase, or they're at least putting down 50%, in a lot of cases, or you can see government loans covering up to 50%, but you don't see that in residential. You put down 5-10% and you're golden. But in agriculture,
but people don't have the, to order to go in there and land, and like what you said, put 50% down, that might not be 50% cash. They have a land base or land holdings that they can allocate some type of funds or additional collateral, and saying, okay, I've got this farm over here, I'm going to use it for collateral to purchase this one. And there may be no money down, so to speak, but they have, the land base or the amount of acres that they need to offer it as additional collateral.
That's a good point too, as far as, it might not be cash, but there's going to be a tangible asset behind it, as opposed to just, straight up loan 90% that you see a lot of the time. And to boot, when you're talking agriculture, there might be a recessionary period. There might be a market correction in some areas, but what people are always going to do is eat, and agriculture produces that food, and it still holds value, and it maintains sort of a hedge status, right? When you're talking about investing, is a lot of people use land to hedge things. I don't think necessarily, sometimes in the ag market, depending on what the business structure of the enterprise is, but it's interesting to note that in the last few months, we've seen increases in agricultural land in terms of price per acre. So let's talk a little bit about, what makes your area good for agriculture. Nebraska has a reputation for agriculture. The whole Midwest is sort of an agricultural area, but specifically Nebraska has a great reputation for it. What makes it so great for that?
I would say the rainfall, really, for Iowa and Nebraska. The rainfall, and especially for Nebraska, we have the Ogallala Aquifer underneath us, and we've got plenty of water for irrigation. That I think is one of the key things that Nebraska has over really any other state. But the thing is now, I don't know how much truth there is in this, but they always say every 100 miles to the east, you get an extra inch of rainfall. Now, Iowa obviously is east of Nebraska, so they get a little bit more rainfall than Nebraska does. There are areas in Iowa where they do have irrigation center pivots, but yet I think they get a lot more rainfall than we do here in the northeast part of Nebraska. So that's one of the things is we have plenty of water. We can irrigate a lot. But yeah, I think that's the biggest plus that we have here. And plus good soil types too. Yeah, there are some areas out west of Nebraska. Yeah, we have sandier soils, northern part, north central. There are some sandier soils, but they're still, with the irrigation and the water, they're able to make some good yields. But then Iowa, a lot of it is dry land. But they make phenomenal yields. They have good soil types over there. So water and good soil types, as far as if you're just trying to do a broad stroke of both states in general.
And you discussing yields brings to mind sort of that goes into the valuation of cropland as well. Just explain really quick how you evaluate cropland, because I think it's an interesting topic for anybody that's not associated necessarily with agriculture. I think it's secondhand for anybody that's in the industry, but just from an outside perspective, what goes into sort of evaluating when you're looking at a specific piece of cropland?
It really will start with location. You want to look at the availability of water within that area that you're in. And then you're getting down to basically your soil types. In Nebraska, we have classifications from 1 to 6. But then in Iowa, they have the CSR ratings, which it gives you an average of your soils across the board, which I really like the CSR ratings that Iowa does versus the classifications of 1 through 6 in Nebraska. So it is a little bit in Nebraska. It's a little bit harder to sit there and break it down as far as getting a soil classification, but that's primarily what you want to look at is soil classifications. What it has, obviously a sandier soil isn't going to produce as good as good black dirt. So you just have to look at that. And then, in some areas, there's a mix of that.
Do you take into account current yield or past yield when you're looking at evaluating any kind of land? You
do and you don't. I'll only kind of answer that as a yes and no question, really. that one's kind of a tough one because farmers, operators can sit there and say, oh, across the board, our corn did 300. Well, that's kind of more like a fish story. You stretch it a little bit. But for the most part, you can kind of tell, what kind of operator they are, what yields they get, and yields really depend on, if water, if it's irrigated, then it depends on how much fertilizer you put on, is your weed control good? Those things will affect yields. But if you have a dry land, you're dependent on Mother Nature. And if you have a real dry summer, it's, your yields are going to suffer on that. Or if the price of fertilizer skyrocketed and you're like, I'm not going to put that many units on, it's just depends on your business model. It depends on Mother Nature. There's a lot of variables when it comes into that. So that's why I say yes and no when you're doing your valuation, because one year you may have a bumper crop, the other year might not be so good. And the other thing too to look at too, Mac, when it comes to Mother Nature, you might get hail out too, and that'll affect your crops, or high winds, and you have some green snap, and you have a bunch of corn laying down. So Mother Nature can either help you or hurt you, and then it also affects your yields on those things too.
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably a good reason why commodities trading is known as the most volatile as far as investments go, just because you have those natural disasters. And then like to your point, and maybe you can expand upon this a bit, is especially with dry land or kind of any sort of crop where, depending on your rotations, depending on what you're growing, you're going to deplete the soil at a certain point unless you're using certain practices. So you have to replace the nutrients in the soil. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, no-till practices are the best, but then there are some years, you may have to till it under. A lot of the guys will do their end rows and stuff just because, your combines and tractors will compact the soil. But then the big thing to watch for is okay, you get through harvesting, you leave all the corn stalks out there. That's going to replenish a lot of your nutrients, phosphorus, nitrates back in the soil as they decompose. That's why no-till practice really is the best practice. But if you come in there, and a lot of the guys will use those corn stalks for their feedlot, they need something to add to their silage that they feed to the cattle. But if you do that, you kind of take that away. So you got to replenish that back into your soil somehow. So you just have to go spread some, phosphorus back onto your fields there that you took those corn stalks out on, because they didn't give the winter to decompose and work their way back into the soils.
Yeah. And so how expensive is tilling? What goes into that?
Tilling or just putting your nutrients back in the soil?
Well, let's go both, because I mean, they're kind of alternatives to each other, right? If I'm understanding correctly.
You got two different things. So if you're going to go in there and till the ground, turn it up, that's just a pass over the field, with your field cultivator. But that's just getting the soil ready, basically. So that's just a pass over the field. If you got equipment, if you don't have the equipment, you can always hire someone to custom do that for you in that aspect of things. But most guys, they have some type of a field finisher to do that. But if you're looking at, putting your phosphate, your phosphorus, nitrates, or nitrogen back into the soil, I actually had to ask my brother this question, because he says, just with everything that's going on this year, I mean, you could pick an excuse, whether it's the Russia and Ukraine deal, whether it's inflation, whether it's the diesel fuel. He said, just basically this year, it's an extra $100 an acre versus last year. So the cost of your fertilizers and chemicals have gone up. And it also depends on the region that you're in, because, you could be right next door to a supplier and it doesn't take you anything to get to it. Like in my family farm's case, we're 15 minutes away from a supplier. But let's say you're out in the western part of the state and it's a couple hours or an hour away. So your shipping cost now with diesel fuel is going to increase. The other side of the thing is the cost of applying that to your farm. Whether you have your own sprayer or you're hiring the guy at the local co-op to apply it. There's so many variables to that aspect of things when you're talking about fertilizer and chemicals. I'd hate to give you any type of figures at this point.
Well, I mean, in case you can't tell, I don't come from a farming specific background. So this is where I get to leverage your lifetime of knowledge and just learn. And that's where that's really where I love these podcasts for the most part is I just get fed with a fire hose, just all this great information. And it's like, I picture somebody listening to me try to talk about things that knows farming and like, man, this guy's an idiot. But at the same time, farming is like, oh.
Well, I can appreciate all that, but, I do have a wealth of knowledge behind me. My dad and my brother, they do that day in and day out. I've kind of fallen back and now I'm sitting behind the desk a little bit more than I want to. But I have a wealth of knowledge that I could just pick up the phone and call.
That's helpful too, right?
So I do have to give some credit there to them. It's not all me, I'll tell you that.
You got the phone a friend network.
Exactly. That's What talk show was that? Can I phone a friend?
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I think, right?
Yeah, exactly. Who wants to be a millionaire in farm ground?
Yeah.
Phone a friend, please.
I think there were a lot of farmers that would argue that it's not a thing.
It's probably
not. So, let's kind of bounce into the areas of buying and selling of cropland, because that's kind of, that's what we do as an organization. And I think that that's helpful to anybody looking at where they own land they've inherited land from grandpa or their parents, or maybe they're just looking, they're worn out and they're tired of hot days and sitting in a combine kind of stuff. Or maybe someone's looking to get into it. I want to look at that from both sides. So let's consider, sellers first. If someone is considering selling land, they have cropland, they have open land. What should they know before they even go about the process? What's sort of the things that they want to have together and really get their head around?
Well, most of the guys that own agricultural land, they are very well versed of how to do it, what I need to do. So there's not, I don't want to say those guys probably, I'll tell you this, those guys know more about the land that they're about ready to sell than I do. It's more me interviewing them and saying, okay, what do you have here? What have you done to the place? And having them educate me so I can put it out there for sale. That's, it's not like a residential agent going in and say, you should really paint this wall. You should really change that carpet out. Agricultural landowners, they know their stuff.
Does that come down even to the standpoint of valuation, or do you encounter farmland or ranch land where you go up and, they want $10 million for 5 acres, something like that? Is there some expectation setting there, or do they usually know the value pretty well?
They'll know their value very well because, there will be auctions out there and those prices are publicized. They're usually smaller communities. Everybody knows each other for the most part. And, they talk about it, they'll say, hey, did you see that Christensen Farms? You know what it sold for? So they know very well. They have a good handle on what it's worth. So it's, but I still will come prepared, and within that county, I will start looking at, dry land sales, irrigated sales, trying to compare it to what they have. Obviously, each tract is different. There's no perfect tract. There's no tract that looks exactly like the other one. So there's going to be positives and negatives to each one. But yeah, you come prepared with land sales with them. And then we sit there and discuss, the positive and negatives. And then we say, okay, yeah, this one's better or worse than the one that just sold.
Okay. And so in that respect, this is a crowd that it's not like your rec land owner that has a parcel somewhere that they see once a year and they don't probably have a whole grasp of the value. This is somebody who's, elbow deep in the land every day and knows the value of it and knows how it produces, right?
Yeah. They've been on it. They've taken care of it. It's their baby. And, and the last thing you want to do is go in there and call their baby ugly. And they want, $10,000 an acre. And you're sitting there saying, looking on paper, it looks to me, it's 8,000. So how do we bridge this $2,000 gap? So that's what we're out there trying to do. I don't know if that's a good example or not, but
no, I think that's a great example. And that kind of leads me to, number one is they're probably going to, I know that there's some private transactions in the ag market, but really, for them to find a good land professional to work with, what does a seller want to find in a land professional to work with them on selling their land?
Well, in my experience, the first thing that they're going to do is really interview you to get to know you, to figure out what your background is. If you can talk the talk and walk the walk with them, then they're comfortable with you. Then yes, they're going to proceed forward with listing it. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question. What I take from that is it's got to be a good fit as far as communication. Like you've got to be able to talk together. They want to find somebody who can communicate in a way that they kind of meld with, Yeah. When you can sit there and talk farming about them and ask them what their yields are, if you're out there looking at it and let's say it's an irrigated corridor and you're talking, or it's a valley pivot or it's a zymatic pivot. Okay, is this a electric unit or does it have a power unit? What type of power unit do you have running there? You can start asking those questions and then it just starts flowing. To me, it's just the art of sitting there talking to them and maybe not just jumping in right away and say, okay, what do you got? What is it worth? Just those dry questions that way. I don't really think that anybody wants to have a salesman come up to them like that.
Yeah, nobody wants to be sold to, like that. It's that you want to sort of know that you can get along and know that you can have a relationship. And to boot, I was going to say, thank you for solidifying to me in the course of that, everything that you just said, that I should never, ever sell a farm. Why is that? I have no idea what you just said or what any of that meant. This concludes part 1 of episode number 13 of the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing agricultural land with Nebraska land professional Ryan Schroeter. Be sure to tune in next week for the second half of our interview with Ryan Schroeter to learn more about farmland. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. Hey there, listener. I noticed that you're still hanging out, probably listening to the music. But what I wanted to do was remind you to check out our Land Tour 360s at nationalland.com. These land tours are innovative, interesting, and nobody else in the industry does this. Check out our site, look for any listing that has Land Tour 360 featured on it. You can tour our listings in 3 dimensions, zoom in, get a ground's eye view, watch videos from the ground, zoom back out, look at things from the sky view, then zoom back in on properties that have 3D views of the houses that are on the properties. This is called a Matterport viewing. It's a 3D viewing system for housing. Check out Land Tour 360. It should blow you away. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.